Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and yet again I'm thinking about what would happen if there was a simple spelling mistake of maybe just one letter on a programme or a musical theatre poster. You can call me as mad as a hatter, but we might be treated to that wonderful musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber, Caps, which surely must feature that song by Cole Porter, Who Wants to Be a Milliner? Well, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe is but a few days away, and what an exciting sentence that is. Almost as exciting as the prospect of going to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Of course, if you get the chance, do go along. But not every show that makes a success at the Fringe returns to the Fringe. Sometimes you never hear of them again. But very often they do go on and have a shelf life elsewhere. And so is the case for the show that we're going to be talking about today. And that is The War of the Worlds on a Budget. Yes, you did hear that correctly. H.G. Wells's evergreen science fiction story from 1895, unbelievably, has been adapted many, many times. You'll be aware of Orson Welles's groundbreaking 1930s radio version, of course, and it's been made into films, plays, dramas and musicals. And we can't get away without saying Jeff Wayne. But the musical I'm talking about today is not Jeff Wayne's version of The War of the Worlds, but a completely new version, which I saw at last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and which you can see this year, not at the Fringe, but in September and October when it goes on a national tour. So it's really exciting for me to be able to talk about the afterlife, the legacy of an Edinburgh Festival Fringe show. But what is War of the Worlds on a Budget all about? Well, here's the blurb. Step aside, H.G. Wells. Take a break, Jeff Wayne. Go back to your trailer, Tom Cruise. Lamphouse is tackling War of the Worlds, and they're doing it on a budget. War of the Worlds on a Budget features one actor, a loop pedal, lots of cardboard, many, many hats, and at least two absolutely terrifying, brackets, definitely not made out of paper, close brackets, tripod puppets. Can our hero outrun the aliens, play 25 characters, unwind himself from the microphone cable, stop for a tea break and save a day before it's too late? Featuring a full soundtrack of brand new music and paying homage to H.G. Wells' story with a few extra silly additions, War of the Worlds on a Budget is the musical comedy action adventure we didn't know we needed. And it was created by Lamphouse Theatre, and in particular their producer and artistic directors, that's Becky Owen-Fisher, she's the producer, and Tom Fox, the artistic director. And they were both wonderful people and talented people. And you'll have a chance to judge that for yourselves, because in just a minute we'll hear a conversation I had with Tom and Becky about this wonderful show. It was fabulous. If you like shows which are brimming with originality and excitement and inventiveness, then this is the show for you. And as I say, if you want to be able to see it later in the year, in September and October, you can. And I'll be telling you how to do that later in the episode. But first, let's hear that conversation I had with Becky and Tom. And of course, between the three of us, we had enough legs for 2 tripods, which ironically is exactly the same number of tripods mentioned in the blurb for the show. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Becky and Tom about War of the Worlds on a Budget. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
I'm Tom Fox. I'm Artistic Director of Lamphouse Theatre, but also performing in War of the Worlds on a Budget, which we're doing at the space at Surgeons Hall.
And I'm Becky Owen-Fisher. I'm the producer at Lamphouse and also various other production roles in War of the Worlds on a budget.
Now, War of the Worlds is a piece we all know, and of course, should we talk about the elephant in the room immediately? You know, I believe the name Jeff and Wayne need to be combined together to form another version of War of the Worlds, which of course has had a long history. You start with David Essex. That's a pretty good position. But yours is a completely new version. And it's a delight as a completely new version, and it's a delightful musical as a completely new version. It's also a lot more than just a musical. I enjoyed it immensely. I thought it was wonderful, but I loved the songs as well, you know. So how did it come to be? And this is the question I'm going to staple onto that. How overtly careful did you have to be about making sure it wasn't accidentally like Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds?
Yeah, I mean, very careful. But that was kind of the game that we wanted to play. Like my dad used to play Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds when I was little, so I knew the album quite well, and that's probably my reference, whereas everyone...
Ulla!
I know, yeah.
But then I'd read the novel, and it's one of my kind of top sci-fi novels, so it was an interesting collaboration between us to kind of work out how to make a hybrid of those with a little bit of homage to Tom Cruise's film version in there as well.
Only a little bit.
Tiny little bit. So we had a composer on board, Rebecca Applin, and a musical director, Sam Summerfeld.
I know Rebecca from a long time
Do
ago.
you?
Yes.
Yeah,
She's terribly well respected. Terribly well known. Oh right, well, no wonder I liked it.
Yeah, but she was excellent at going, okay, so we've got the Jeff Wayne album. We want it to sound familiar.
Esque,
but also be something very, very different. And I think she even looked up like legal ramifications, going, how many notes can you have similar and how many notes not? And although I think she didn't, I think she went away from that.
There's no copy.
Yeah,
there's no.
Copy.
I would say there isn't at all. What you do get is sounds which are a little bit like. Also, I mean, forgive me if you don't mind me saying straight away, the phrase "the War of the Worlds" is set to music, and the moment you hear the rhythm of the War of the Worlds, obviously that also happened in other musicalised versions because there's other versions as well. And just that rhythm naturally takes you into kind of echoes.
Yeah.
And also, there's a certain amount of, I don't know the term, I'm afraid, musically, but flanging, or those 1970s sounds.
Yes.
And the 1970s sounds help to evoke it much more than any melody, funnily enough. So I don't think this, to me, it sounded like a completely new score, but with echoey ghosts of the, more of the orchestration, actually, slightly. The flavours were there if you wanted them. It's like a good wine, how's that? The flavours were there if you wanted them, but it's actually its own vintage, completely, I'd say.
Oh, brilliant!
Well,
Thank you.
I'm really pleased that's come across.
That's really good. Yeah, and Rebecca Applin worked really hard in trying to, like, all of those different layers of orchestration. And because we're a devising company, we were very lucky to have her in the room a lot. And
particularly in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes, I know, right? Yeah. And she layered up. So every day she was on her computer, like putting more in or taking more out. We had that conversation about how much vocal, because there's a lot of pre-recorded like backing vocals in there, as well as, like you say, those 70s sounds. And
we wanted it to sound like, stop me if I'm talking out of turn here, but I think what we wanted it to sound like was that it was possible that one person could have made all of that. So that kind of techno-y, sort of futuristic-y noise is all
but almost
stuff
bedroom possibilities.
Yeah, it's all the stuff that you get on like your old Casio keyboard. Yeah. The idea was that we didn't want it to sound like a full orchestra was doing it because it's a one-person show. It needed to sound as though one person could be doing that on stage. So it was all that, kind of based around that idea of like the keyboard effects.
Well, I'd like to go back, and we will talk about the songs again in a minute, but let's go back to its sort of genesis. So you'd had the idea, and you've come at it from two different directions, which I really love. This is a fusion meal, therefore. Yeah. But how difficult was the stapling together of visions?
Oh, it's so interesting. I mean, we usually, as a devising company, our process normally starts with writing a treatment, so working out what are the plot points that we really need to hit in the thing, what are the things that people will want to see. We need to have Thunderchild in there, we've got to have a tripod in there, we've got to have a tentacle in there, all of those bits, and then working around that where the jokes come, where the comedy comes. So it usually starts with a couple of pages of A4, which is just points we've got to start with, and then generally Tom, and we had a couple of other comedy performers in the room with us, would improvise around that idea, and then I write down all the funny things, and then slowly it forms itself into a structured piece of work, and then around that going, right, what big songs do we need to punctuate all of this throughout? So it's a really collaborative process.
We had lots of paper on the wall.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And it moved around every day, and we had a completely different structure at the very beginning, didn't we?
It was very different. And we had two people who were incredibly influential, so co-directors, Merce Ribot and Richard Palmwell, who came in and just helped us to kind of shape those comedy moments and to look at how we could make sure that we were telling the story as efficiently as possible.
Dramaturg, I think is the word you're grasping.
Sort of. They were sort of comedy consultants. I kind of dramaturged. They did a bit. It was a
very
big
collaborative.
Sort of collaborative.
But that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's the best kind. That's also the most fun, isn't it?
Yes.
But there's something you said there which I think is really interesting. But actually, you boil it down to its basics and then you build up. So basically, from the reductive comes the expansive.
Yes.
And that's quite an interesting concept, isn't it? Because a lot of people want to show everything and show how much they know and throw it all in. And we know the famous Twain quote about killing your babies when it comes to editing. But actually, I really like this approach, which is you start with your building blocks. What are the essentials? And then from there, you can travel in any direction. What were the paths not travelled? Do you mind my asking?
No, of course.
Well, actually...
Or perhaps set upon and then travelled back from it.
Yeah.
We were still editing on the train on the way up here.
We were.
As a good fringe show should.
Yeah.
We had... I'm just talking loads, sorry.
No, this is great.
Okay.
As long as you both agree, that's
Sure. We had a couple
This
of...
is live. It's all live.
What are you saying?
We had a team of writers in America.
We did have a couple of sections in there that touched on it was Boris Johnson jokes, really. So we had some Prime Minister stuff in there because obviously we have a sort of mini Boris Johnson in it talking about, no, the aliens aren't coming to London, don't worry. And we had a couple of sections in there of they were up-to-date political jokes, but by the time we were in previews they were already out of date.
Well, Britain has been a maelstrom politically and satirically, so I would say this, I got a Boris Johnson resonance, but in a totally different place. Your wonderful zip wire of the rocket travelling from Mars to... And of course, I mean, it was years ago, it was Olympic years, a decade ago, and yet that sort of sticks in the memory, so I wondered if I was going to see a little action man atop.
I'm immediately adding that for tomorrow. So there were some bits like that, and I'm sure there were some other plot points that we, from H.G. Wells.
Yeah, so in previews we had about, one of the previews went for an hour and 15 minutes. And we're about 55 minutes here, so we've lost about 20 minutes.
The Edinburgh time slot, so there was still some Mark Twain in there then.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it does cohere, by the way. If you like that, if you'd like a lay ear to confirm that to you.
Yes,
that's wonderful.
You.
That's very good to know.
It's a really good exercise for anyone, I think, to go, like you say, because you have stuff that is your favourite things, and I love performing that. But actually, if it's not there, an audience doesn't miss it.
Yeah.
Is it relevant?
Is it relevant?
Do you
exactly.
really need it? And is it moving the story along? And that was the question we had to keep asking, because we had some very funny sock puppets in these political scenes, and it was very funny stuff, but it wasn't serving the story in any way. So that went, didn't it? And there was something else, I can't remember what. There were a few bits.
And then just going back to how we began as well, going, okay, we wanted to respond to the Jeff Wayne, the H.G. Wells book, and are those political jokes actually doing that? They're not really, they're just there for fluff. So that all went.
It did.
But it makes it more transportable in a way, doesn't it? Because if you want to do this again in a year's time, those jokes wouldn't have been so good necessarily.
Absolutely.
You've been very, I think, prescient as well. Topicality, unfortunately, it's quickly stale.
Yes, it makes it very difficult.
Whereas you're working with one of the great bits of British literature, in a sense. It's lasted 100 years, isn't it? I mean, it'll go on another 100 years, another 10 years. It'll go. Listen to me.
At least another 10 years.
We'll see.
But I like, if I may say, may I call it the feminist gloss?
Please.
Well, I will do then. The feminist gloss. There we are. I did so. But actually, I really like that element of still being true and affectionate to the original, whilst at the same time gently pointing out that it has one or two weaknesses which are due to the cultural mores of the day in which it was written, ladies and gentlemen. But actually you find a clever way of keeping it intact, or at least travelling in the direction of the original whilst making something of that. And you also described it as a one-person show. It is a one-person show, but with four hands. So it's
I like that. Yeah. We the feminist gloss came out of reality in rehearsals. I really genuinely was enraged
Yes, quite right.
that the female is so underwritten, and we were really aware, I think, during rehearsals of how can you have a man playing a female character? How is that okay? It's not, and so we wanted to be quite specific in our commentary on that, and we went through a lot of versions before we got to where we are.
But you did it so light-heartedly. I mean, I think the audience bought into that completely. I certainly did. It seemed to make sense. I mean, I'm a great fan of Robert Louis Stevenson, and whilst I once adapted Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and once again the same problem exists. It's a great story. It's a fabulous story, and it's an evergreen and a classic and an archetype. And yet, at the same time, well, let's look at the female cast. Right, I've done that, and there seems to be almost nobody there. There's the evil housekeeper who gets a full half page, and then there's the flighty maid who sees the murder of Sir Danvers Carew on the Thames.
Yes.
And basically, her interaction with the police is, "I saw the murder." But you're a flighty maid. Yes, I shall disregard what you have to say because you're a flighty maid. All right then, bye. Yeah. And that's your female contingent. Come on. But to be able to be true to it and yet at the same time 21st centuryize it, there's a terrible cumbersome phrase. But I thought it was great, and it needed to be done, and it was done nicely, and that's the point. There was. I really liked it. I also liked the fact that actually then that allows the show to become the two-handed one-person show that it actually ultimately becomes. You do appear on stage just briefly at the beginning, setting a prop, and then a little bit more at the end, and you are the narrator as well, which is the voice of authority. Let us never forget in any piece.
Thank you very much.
But it comes across that way. You're the voice of authority in terms of a narrative, but you're the voice of authority in terms of the production and the performance. Actually, we can hear your communication with God, essentially, as the man on the stage. So, to me, I really like the flavours of all of that.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, and we really enjoyed those moments, kind of creating those moments where you're not happy with what I'm doing, so you just have to cough in the microphone or do whatever, and then I have to change it.
Yes.
And we just used that as an improvisation game in the rehearsal room and found all of these lovely moments.
Nice reference to Etsy, I thought.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's slightly different every performance as well.
But that's also one of the things that keeps these things fresh, isn't it? Those little moments where you've got a framework, but actually there are here and there's and everywhere that you can just put in little bits and fresh, what's today's joke, and actually keep each other happy too.
It does make it much more interesting, yes.
Yeah. And every audience is different as well, and we love responding to that, whether you call that clowning or whatever in performance.
In Edinburgh terms, it's interaction.
Interaction.
That's the umbrella term for that, isn't
it?
And not everyone clenches their buttocks, but you can always tell the ones who are doing so. Don't pick me.
Yeah.
I sat in the middle at the back deliberately.
Well, we also wanted to do that in a warm and welcoming way as well. And
you're very good with the children, by the way, because you have all age groups as well. That's very nice. It's almost like, I think people coming for the GCE, it's not GCE anymore, I'll show your age, why not, Tom? Thos? GCSE text.
Yes,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's it is. I think it works really well for a wide range of ages. I mean, we said 12 plus on our flyers because we did, but there have been a few younger ones in, and I think they've enjoyed it. And it's silly enough. And
silly and absurd goes a terribly long way, and it's an international language of all ages as well. I mean, I adored it, and I noticed your throwaway joke about having trained in Paris, which so you're a professional physical performer. I don't know what the phrase is.
Yeah. Oh, well, trained with Philippe Gollier just outside of Paris in Étampes. And I did clowning with him and le jeu, which basically means play.
Yes.
So I would physical performer, clown.
Play is such a good word, isn't it? I like that a lot.
Yeah. That's pretty much what we say we do. We play.
Professional play people.
Yeah. And that's basically what the training was. Going play is a very serious business. You have to be absolutely present every time you go on that stage, and the audience need to feel like this is happening for them. Like this is not a copy and paste from last night.
Oh yes. And there's bits of improv help with that, don't they?
Totally.
It's the freshness.
Yeah, and we love that, and that's just bringing kind of the joy into every show, in whatever way we can. Is important.
But I would like to talk about the songs again, if I may. So, I mean, tell me how, with an established text and an established adaptation of that text already knocking around the world. The Jeff Wayne one is more or less sung through. I mean, and this is performance and song and performance. So where do you put the songs? How do you get to that position? Was that your choice? Was that Rebecca's? Was that obviously collaborative? But where are the nexus points for songs? Is it clear, or was it actually a struggle?
Or is it a bit of both?
It's usually quite clear. Normally it's, I'm a big fan of telling story through song. I think if you can do it through lyrics, do it through lyrics. Let's not mess about having a scene and lots of conversation and then reiterating it through a song. It's too far.
I agree.
Thank you so much. So for me, when I was plotting out the treatment and it worked both of us, but thinking about where things would go, it was always going to be about the points that we needed to highlight and what was the purpose of the song. So we knew we needed a theme song. That's what we begin with, War of the Worlds, on a budget. But then we've got, Red Weed. There's a song for Red Weed. There's a song for Heat Ray. There's a song for Thunderchild. Basically at the plot points. I think every scene pretty much has a song or at least a backing track to it.
We kind of pitched the song ideas to Rebecca Applin, our composer. And she's amazing at kind of musical dramaturgy. So she will go, but why? Why do you want a rock song there when you're wearing Heat Ray?
Yes.
Like, what is the reason? Yes, it's funny, but why? And so she was very good at kind of finding purpose. Going, it can only sit there in that way for a reason. And like you say, is it narratively? Is it character development? Is it? And even in a silly, absurd show, you do have to consider this. You do need to, absolutely.
And then, it allowed us to have so that the Red Weed song is exceptionally stupid in a good way. I don't want to reveal what it is that we do, but it's very stupid, and it's not narrative. It doesn't do anything for the story. It's there because it's a funny moment, and by having Rebecca's eye on that musical dramaturgy, we were able to allow ourselves 2 minutes there to go, that's very funny, and it doesn't need to move the story on. We earn it by that stage.
Yeah, I agree with you absolutely, because it is the scene that is most excisable from what you've got left. Because but also, I tell you what it felt like to me. It felt like the thing that actually people would remember afterwards hadn't been in it if you hadn't put it in from the Jeff Wayne version.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because I think it seems in my head to have more importance in the Jeff Wayne version than it does perhaps in the novel, or rather, it has greater emphasis in that version. So I think actually doing that is a great homage to people's understandings of it, because actually it's so much, it's a known commodity and yet it's not a known commodity. It's like Jekyll and Hyde, funny enough. It's everyone knows Jekyll and Hyde, and yet no one knows Jekyll and Hyde. What they know is the gimmick, the hook, and it's the same with War of the Worlds. It's been adapted so many times. People will have known one of the adaptations in some form, but very people know the nuts and bolts of the story from the original, which means you can play with it or play with people's perceptions of it. So I think you're right. I think you do earn that one. Because you worked so hard all the way up to that point. So, and also, actually, tonally, it's nice to have things which aren't necessarily always pushing the plot forward, and they are just there for fun.
You need to give your audience a little bit of a break sometimes, just to catch up and go, what's
cogitating now. So, but it is a very physical piece.
Yeah.
And so that obviously comes from the devising and your training. But it had once again. These questions are so generic, so my apologies. But how does one work through a scene and think, right? Are we back to your reductive shopping list again to begin with? You mentioned tentacles; that's always good. There's some fabulously imaginative stuff with things that work, and I'm not going to give them away so people can see the show. You also have the cutest Martian I think I've seen for a very long time, actually. But also just your appearance as Mars. That's hilarious. And because it's in 2 stages, without revealing what those 2 stages are, we see the thing that represents Mars, and then something happens to it, which is funny, and also gives it life.
Sure, yes. Yeah.
Ironically. The one thing we're still searching for on Mars, I'm told scientifically.
It's we really thrive off working on that kind of element of surprise, and the one thing that we always say to ourselves is, how do we build every scene, every appearance, everything that happens, how does it build on the last thing? How is it like a new unexpected thing? Unexpected is probably a really good word to try and describe what we try and do. So every time we bring something out, it has to feel different or better or funnier or more interesting, unless we deliberately decide to make it very similar to something else, and then it becomes a
comic repetition.
Exactly.
And we were very lucky as well to work with people, bring people into the rehearsal room. So Lee Gibson, Yasmin Gibson came in, and they're cardboard creators.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
So they nice props.
So they came in, and we had a discussion about how we wanted to do several of the props, including the tripods. And then they went off and they made them, and we also worked with a puppet maker, Dan Cook, who made one of our larger pieces
which I might not reveal just in case anyone sees the show, because that's...
But there are props large and small. That's the lovely thing about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you have to manhandle a lot of them on stage. But there's also imagination. I mean,
Yes.
I like the repetitious bit. For example, you were just talking about. There's a wonderful bit where you've come home from work before the invasion has really taken place, and you're going up and down your stairs and opening doors, and you're doing all the sound effects yourself, and then when there's calls to leave the room again, and you start, so you've done all the repetition. We think, are we going to get all this? And then you sort of say, and you get the idea with that, and then sort of stroll onto the plot. And actually, the repetition allows you then to undercut it. It's once again the unexpected.
Yeah.
Was it Jonathan Miller who said something like that? The thing that makes people laugh is the sudden realisation of the unexpected, or I probably misquoted him terribly, and I'm sure it was considerably longer, but that was the concept. And I think there is something in it that, people have an expectation, you set them up, then you do something totally different, which is essentially what a punchline is, or a physical punchline.
Totally, yeah. The unexpected, we talk about that a lot, actually. Yeah. What will they not expect next?
Yes.
And have you had to change things in performance? Because the audience will tell you things that you perhaps hadn't tweaked, or the audience are very good, and even though they're different every day, tell you what they like.
Yeah.
And also some things that aren't landing doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, but they might land one day and not the next. That's awkward as well.
We found that a lot, and there are several bits that we were like, okay, that's not landing, but then we did it again, and it gets a huge response. And you go, okay, so it lands once, let's change it, and then that doesn't work, and then we go back, and then it gets a good response again, and then it does. So you've just got to hold your nerve, I think, a bit, and go, okay,
it is working. It's just not always being responded to.
It's really fascinating. You can't say like this audience is responding better to the physical jokes and this audience is responding better to the funny wordplay, but somehow you do sometimes feel like sometimes you get an audience and you can really hear them listening to the lyrics and they're laughing in the right places, but the physical stuff they're maybe not giving you as much.
BBC Radio 4 audience.
Yeah, but then we're not screening them as they come in, so I don't know how much.
Which day are you here for? Are you observed or are you Liverpool?
Yeah. Could you come back tomorrow? We'll do it. It's very interesting, and it's very like you say, you do just have to hold your nerve and go, we do know that this does work, it's just that, but then also because of the nature of the show, it's got an element of that kind of improvisational feel to it. I have the power and you have the power to go, let's just move on. And there are moments when I can just prompt you and go, okay, we're going on now, I'm hitting the cue. And it's nice to have that kind of conversation, and that brings it back to making it feel quite real and kind of present, and I think that's really important as well. So,
but as performers, and you both are performers, how easy is it for you to do that kind of thing, that liaison? Shall we say, when actually one or other of you is moving on to the next bit and the other has to take the cue for that, because one of you, you're at the back of the stage as narrator and tech, and and you're on the stage, so you're not actually together at any time. So I appreciate you're in each other's eye line, but you're not necessarily in proximity. And of course there is an audience between you as well. Is it easy? Is it difficult? Are you just used to working with each other sufficiently now? Or?
Yeah,
it's definitely got.
Hello.
No, I mean, we have worked together for a very long time, and I think we can sort. I feel like I know what you're thinking when you're performing. Yeah, and I can tell when I'm like, oh no, he's going too far. I'm just going to hit the button. The other day you said to me, were you rushing me through that bit? Because I was hitting the cues. Yes, I was.
Yes. Just needed
to get on with it.
And we've done like 14 shows now in previews and then in Edinburgh, and we've only just got to that point where we're going, we can relax a little bit and we can play a bit more. So it's taken that.
The anxiety out, perhaps, yes.
Yeah, just to feel comfortable with the material and comfortable with each other. And there was one preview that we did in Bedford where the operation box was up like 5 stories up.
Right, gosh.
This huge theatre 5 stories up in this box that had windows.
It was like a 50-second run from the stage.
Yeah.
That must have been fun.
Yeah.
I did a lot of steps that day.
But also, we love like new things like that. So we just gave Becky a microphone so you could hear her coming down the steps, and she pretended to bump into people. Oh, hello! And then the audience loved that, just being able to hear this journey that she had to take.
But a wonderful opportunity to make something of it. Yeah. I mean, that's the secret. We've got this problem, but can we handbrake turn it into something that's fun?
I think that's a really good description of what we try and do. Like, if something goes wrong, we will just incorporate it and work out how to make it something funny. I mean, we did have a moment the other day where something got caught on stage and you pulled the entire backdrop down and everything was revealed. But it gave me the opportunity to come up on stage and fix it, and it got worked in, and it became a thing. And actually, I think I read a review recently where someone said something about I had to come up and fix stuff, and I was like, oh, they thought it was part of the show. Great.
The play that goes wrong on a budget.
Brackets War of the Worlds.
It's also by H.G. Wells. I'm going to go back to the songs. I hope you don't mind, because I think they're fabulous.
Do.
Now, the one I think they're all great, but the one that first stands out is actually one of the early ones. I really do love I love the performance of it, and I love the song of it, which is the We Are the Self-Appointed Group of White Middle-Class Men. I can't remember the title, but it's a beautiful title. It's fine, splendid. It looks great. Because it's a wonderful performance, and I hope you'll permit me on this occasion to explain just very briefly that it's you manipulating a number of dummies on poles as well as yourself. And there's a huge amount of fun to be had from that, and a huge amount of fun was had by me watching that. But the song itself is cracking and absolutely reflects, I was going to say Victorian values, but I rather think they're still very prevalent in middle-aged, middle-class, Middle England.
Yes.
Bedford, perhaps, with their magnificent theatre. But it's a wonderful song. That I mean, do you? I suppose what I'm leading you to here is: do you have any favourite songs, or are any songs that particular challenges, or? That's a showstopper early on, which I think is a really lovely thing.
Yeah, I really enjoy that one. It's really good, and also I like to go out of that into Heat Ray, which is rock and roll, and it's the contrast is very good to play.
My favourite one is the final song. So the final song is it's a big epic end of a musical song, and it's got a big lesson to it. I'm making it sound really boring. I don't think it's that boring, but I really enjoy that one because it's it's key change after key change after key change, and you keep thinking it's going to finish and it doesn't. And it's got a bit of live music in it. You play a bit of live music in it, and some visual gags, and that's my favourite.
I might call it an anthem rather than an educational learning song. But that's Rodgers and Hammerstein all over. So there you are. You're in good company. But yes, you're right. It is a proper final ultimo, isn't it? In that sense. But I do. Yes, you're right. The never-ending key change. The stairway to heaven, essentially. And there's always fun to be had with struggling to reach them sometimes. So, but you've got these songs. They're fabulous. You've also got to work out. I'm going to use the word choreography, but there is choreography. Even if it's one person. That's you're naturally physical, Tom, but performance in song is different from performance outside of song. Do you feel that? Do you think, is it harder? Is it more challenging? Or is it just different? Or is it, no, you're multi-talented, which you clearly are, so I can do that in my stride?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think performance in song is more difficult for me. But just going back to, like we rehearsed them like they were spoken at first, so we had the lyrics and we did it like it was a scene, and so I could get all of the whatever you call it, intonations, actions,
the mechanistic elements of
exactly
it,
and then putting the music on and so layering it up basically.
So actually, in a strange way, choreography before melody.
Sometimes.
I mean, there are some actual choreographed elements to some of it, and we did have a choreographer working with us on a few of those elements as well. But yeah, I think because we're telling story and plot through our lyrics, the most important thing for me is that they were that you knew exactly what they were and that they were heard like poetry. Really, I was really annoyingly specific about making sure that you sang exactly what was written because it's really important a lot of the time for the gag because the rhymes are funny, and a lot of the time for making sure that people are getting the story. So that was where we started with that.
So where did the lyrics come from? Are these collaborative? Are they Rebecca? Are they you?
I wrote most of them.
You're the principal lyricist?
Yes, and
How
Rebecca wrote. Thank you. Rebecca also did some.
Co-lyricist, yes.
And Sam as well.
Oh, Sam wrote one, but mostly it came from me initially,
And you've been responsible. You were saying that you were writing down so much of what was being devised and improvised. So in a strange sense, you're going to be. Oh, this sounds terrible. The paper jockey, but you in a way have to. You're the person who has transmuted the physicality and all the elements actually into the final working script ultimately, or the narrative, the drama, the book. Let's go for that, and that includes lyrics. So how How do you approach a lyric? It's a big question.
It is a big question. Much like poetry for me. I mean, we're lucky because what we're doing is silly. You can get away with a very simple, silly rhyming scheme. There's a lot of A, B, A, B. There's a lot of A, A, B, B. I'm not making it complicated, which helps. But yeah, I do.
It's not Sondheim, is it?
It's not, but it's not trying to be, crucially.
No, that's the point. Yes.
Yeah, so I do. I am a writer as well, independently. So I do write some poetry and stuff. So I guess I approach it initially like I would try and write a funny poem, and then
worked for W.S. Gilbert.
Well, there we are. And then it gets handed over to a genius like Rebecca, who
transmutes it again,
basically. And then we talk about what needs to go, and what makes it fit the music, and what we have to do to make that work. And it's, again, very collaborative. It was a very lovely room to be in. Everybody was very nice and friendly. And
so, well, actually, let's explore that a little bit, because presumably different people in at different times, because obviously these things take time. But you'll appreciate I'm particularly interested in the songwriting.
Yeah.
So, what was the mechanism? You'd sketched out with Rebecca what you wanted and what you needed to do in plot. You'd already perhaps come up with some kind of verse.
Yeah.
So you've got the principal lyric, and presumably it can be tweaked, but you know where it's going. You've got the essence of the song in its narrative form.
Yeah.
Did you just hand it to Rebecca and she went away and came back with the song, or how does one do this in the room and how does one do this outside of the room? And there's no right or wrong answer to this, is there?
It was
really
all of the versions, I think, that you could probably imagine. So in some cases it was a conversation about what is the style of this song, what do we want it to sound like. And so we'd say, for instance, the White Middle Class Men with a White Flag song, that began, and Tom had a tune in his head, and it was the tune of My Old Man's a Dustman.
Oh, right.
And we were like, well, we can't, that exists, so we
exactly,
can't do that.
Right.
But then...
It's not yet folk or out of copyright.
But Becky was like, it needs to be a sort of patter song, it needs to have that sort of feel to it. So that's a really good place to start. So then she went away and worked out how to make it sound, like a sort of Cockney patter song, essentially, although it's not that. But it was very clever kind of.
It felt like a medium tempo Gilbert and Sullivan kind of thing, actually, to me. And in a strange sense, that's absolutely as it should.
Exactly,
it's appropriate for the time, appropriate for the period.
I mean, she's obviously very musically aware,
she knows her onions.
She really does. So she was definitely guiding us on things like that. In some cases, it was I've got these lyrics. We know that we need. So there's a song at the end of what would be the first half.
Yes.
If it had that, and we were like, we know we need it to be a sort of big ending, defying gravity sort of moment. And so she knew, okay, great, I've got this to work with, and I had a couple of verses, and that was what she went with. So it was very much a two-way. And then sometimes we'd say we've kind of almost got a tune, we think, and then she would go, great, brilliant, that helps me, and then we'd write around that. So
obviously rhythm is a very important thing as well, isn't it? So sometimes actually drawing from other sources actually helps rhythmically.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And like we said earlier, we knew that we needed that sort of Jeff Wayne feel to some of it, but we also knew that we didn't want it all to feel like that. There had to be other moments where we were doing other things. And
once again, I think I would describe the for want of a better phrase, the Jeff Wayne sort of soundscape echoes as being here, there, but not everywhere.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what's lovely about it. It isn't, it is its own. I cannot stress this enough. It is its own beast, and the different musical styles really work in that. As you say, you've got rock and roll, but you've also got this much more, Gilbertian style song, for want of a better phrase, and plenty of other to boot. So. I like that. I like the contrast. I think that works very well. It makes it more of a portmanteau show, actually. And actually that you're not doing the thing that people might do in a traditional, more Sondheimian musical, where it's integrated. Yeah. It's not trying to be integrated. It's not trying to make everyone. It goes back as far as Wagner, I'm told, where you integrate everything.
Oh wow!
Let's bring him into the conversation.
Oh, I don't know if I've got enough knowledge to talk about.
No, that's all I know as well. But it is. But he, he's in a way the creator of the integrated musical.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a sentence you don't hear often. But he was. He believed in integrating everything. But the problem is you can integrate things so far, and some shows really thrive on that. A Sondheim will be honed to perfection in all its elements, but actually you don't want every show to be like that. And actually sometimes a jumble bag, well, you know what I mean by that, is actually much more fun. A lucky dip.
Yes.
Yes. So and it suits. If I mean this complimentary, but that is what I like about it. But actually, this bit isn't like that bit, which isn't like this bit again.
I suppose much like we were saying about the props and the way that we built the show earlier. Every single song needed to feel like something unexpected, something surprising, something that built on the last thing. And so the whole idea was that we were going to try and make it as varied as possible.
Now, your performance in it, did you always envisage yourself as having quite as much visibility as you... you're nodding. No, you're shaking your head, I should say. Yeah. Sorry. Right. You're shaking your head as we speak, so clearly that's not the case.
No, so it was a very interesting process. So I'm not a singer. That should probably be the preface to this. And the reason that we're doing a one-man show, well, there's many reasons that we're doing a one-person show, but obviously with Edinburgh, it's the most financially viable way of doing it.
Isn't it just?
But we did have this ongoing discussion from the beginning about how we dealt with the issues of the female characters in the show, and also how we made it not just one voice, because the book, obviously, the narrator in the book is the main character in the book. It's one and the same. And we wanted to make sure that we could reflect that idea of having narration within it. And for a while, we were going to pre-record another performer who works with us so we're going to have pre-recorded narration.
Inserts as well.
Yeah, so he was that was going to be a male voice, and that was something we considered. And for a while, we were going to have like a critic character who was going to sit in and say, "Oh, I don't know about this. You're not dealing with your women very well." And then after discussions with our co-directors and various people, we actually came to the conclusion that I'm a female, so maybe I should say it.
You had to research that, did you?
Well, I am, aren't I? But I was always coming as tech, and I was never initially going to be a voice in the show. But suddenly it sort of made sense because I was the one bringing up this issue, if you like, and we were talking about it in rehearsals, and then we said, well, actually, it's going to be really complicated to do pre-recorded narration. Maybe it's more fun
if to go wrong.
Exactly, and maybe it's more fun if there's a live element. Yeah. And then because of that, because I was there, you said, well, it's daft if we don't see you. So then we ended up building in a couple of opportunities for me to appear on stage. As I say, I am a performer, but I'm not a singer. So it was. We would have loved to have finished. I'd love to have done a big Hedwig thing and finished with me singing a massive aria, but it was never going to happen.
Yeah, but you have the last monologue of the little speech of the
my
show.
Little bit, yeah.
In a strange way, you also open it because I think it's a very sensible move. You come on looking nervous to hang a final prop on a hook. And that got a sort of ripple of applause or ripple of laughter from the day I was there. I think someone actually made a comment. Ooh, late prop. I heard somebody say.
I remember that, yeah.
But actually, what that does, it sets you up to come on later. It's actually a very clever little laying down. It's a trapdoor, isn't it? You open the trapdoor for a later fall in terms of comedy. But, in this, that works very well. So we were talking about how you have ended up being on the stage. So how it became a sort of a duo in a sense. But let's go back to you on the stage. You still have, forgive me, Tom, the people are looking at you the most throughout this.
Sure.
And that requires sustained energy, actually, particularly when you're doing lots of different things. Is that easy? Do you draw that from an audience? Where do you draw your energy from, actually? Because some people draw it from the audience, some people draw it from themselves.
Yeah.
Some people use coffee.
Coffee is important, but yeah, definitely an audience. And the team, the creative team, actually said that first preview. Like, we did a dress rehearsal, no one was laughing, no one was responding.
But only because we'd seen it a million times by
yes, but also when you're doing something really silly and absurd and you're not getting anything back. So I sat in the dressing room after the first dress rehearsal going, I don't think we've got anything, I don't think we're funny.
Oh, no.
But then after the first preview, when we had an audience and I could feed off that and we were offering each other things,
Yes, it's reciprocal, isn't it?
Oh, totally. Yeah,
we often say that about the process of our shows, though, because it is so daft and so silly, and you do have moments where you're standing in a room with a ridiculous prop on your head, and everyone's looking at you very intently, going, "I'm not sure if that works," and then you step back and you think, "What am I doing? This is ridiculous.
This is my life."
Yeah, but then it needs the audience. You can't do it without that. It is a conversation between you and the audience, really, and it doesn't work without that. So it's really hard when you get to those final dress rehearsals and your whole team is, and they're all trying to do other things, and people are balancing sound and people are writing lyrics, and it doesn't work.
And that's the joy of theatre, of course. You know, this wouldn't work nearly as well as a film. I'm sure it would be funny, but it would not be as rewarding an experience for me as a punter, but I suspect as you as performers.
Absolutely. I mean, the first time we did this comes out of something that we created at the very beginning of lockdown. So in 2020, when we went into the first lockdown, we went online and we were like, well, we'll do like a show a week online. And the first one we did was War of the Worlds on a budget. So some of it came from those ideas, and it was great, but you can see the difference it makes having an audience, because obviously doing something on film or online, you're not getting any feedback, and that's very difficult. So it's nice to see seen that journey.
It's funny you should say that. I watched quite a lot, because a lot of people were putting good stuff out, and wanting to try and keep things alive in what we thought would be hopefully a few months or a few weeks bridge till the theatres open again, etc., etc. But of course it wasn't. But actually a lot of the energy was lost, because it's so, as an audience, you are probably on your own or watching it maybe with someone else. There's only one, two or three of you in the living room perhaps watching your screen. And as a performers, you're not getting the feedback, which is, the lifeblood of it all, isn't it? Absolutely. So I tell you what, I've heard a lot of people predicting that a lot of theatre would move online before COVID. I think COVID proved that that's probably not quite going to be the case. I suspect a lot more shows will go online once they've finished their theatrical run. And that seems sensible, actually, a kind of legacy thing.
Yeah.
But you can't beat live theatre in all its forms.
No, you really can't.
So I'll see you here next year. Which leads me neatly into what is the future for this show, and what is the future for you as performers? As far as you're able to say. I'm sure you've got Hollywood films lined up, and the contracts prevent you from saying anything.
So we're hoping.
Was that Mr. McIntosh?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just getting a call. We're hoping to take this show on tour next year. So part of our purpose for being up here is to meet programmers and producers and stuff. So fingers crossed this will be on tour in 2023.
We should never forget the Fringe is a trade show.
It's
a theatrical trade show, and people forget that.
And it's lovely to meet some people that we've never met before and talk to venues that we've never been able to visit before. So hopefully autumn next year we'll be touring this. Fingers crossed.
And we have been talking about Fringe next year.
Hopefully we'll come to the Fringe next year again.
And just thinking about what our next on a budget show will be.
Yes, we're
so
going to
become
themed.
It.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think it's a great idea. I really do. It sounds great.
And we do have various other things, coming up over the course of the year. We also do some family shows, so we have a Christmas family show, and we'll be doing a spring tour of something called Suitcase Shakespeare next year, which is 2-person show, 45-minute versions of Shakespeare that come out of the suitcase.
I love Suitcase. His works are amazing.
Isn't he fantastic?
Every single
and they're
one.
also
they're all mysteries. They're an open and shut case. Hey, I'm here a week.
Very good. And they're also quite everything we do is pretty musically led, isn't it? Hopefully we'll be touring that next year as well. So lots going on.
So how can people find out? What's your website? Are you? Yes, please.
Yes, no, I will.
Give me, as the young people have it, your socials.
My socials. It's all very straightforward. Our website is lamphousetheatre.co.uk. Lamphouse. It's not a word, which makes it very difficult to remember.
We've created a new word.
We have. And then we're also on
Facebook.
Lamphouse. We're on Facebook, Lamphouse Theatre. Instagram at Lamphouse Theatre, Twitter Lamphouse Theatre, without the E on the end.
We are on TikTok, but we haven't done much.
But we're no good at it. We're such millennials.
So if anyone could teach us,
that'd be great.
I'm not on TikTok. It will come as no one's.
But so all of our show information and tour information gets posted all over our socials and our website, and that's that.
Well, can I thank you both, A, for your time in this conversation, which has been really interesting. I loved hearing about how it's come to be. I love talking about the show because I loved the show. It was as simple as that. It is fun and funny and wonderful. And to be honest, if that's not the perfect set of flavours for an Edinburgh show, I don't know what is.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Musical Talk. Well, there we are. That was Tom Fox, the artistic director, and Becky Owen-Fisher, the producer of Lamphouse Theatre, talking about their wonderful show, War of the Worlds on a Budget. Described variously as fearless fun and an absolute riot, but also, I think, even better, brilliantly bonkers. It's a great show, and even more excitingly, there's a chance for you to go and see it, because it's on a national tour in September and October 2023. Go along to the website lamphousetheatre.co.uk to find out where you can see it. But venues include Coventry, Guildford, Colchester, London, Leeds, Huntingdon, Brentwood, Rotherham, Shrewsbury, Weymouth, Didcot, Alnwick, Bristol, Birmingham, Worcester, Chester, and Lichfield, and many, many others. It's a great show, and I hope to try and catch it again myself as part of that national tour. Why don't you join me? Well, just a quick shout out again for our old friend David Herzog's Welsh podcast called Crocan Disney, in English, Cauldron of Disney, which he and his wife April are presenting about all things Disney, including Disney musicals. They've recently done an episode about The Little Mermaid. But here's the exciting thing about it. It's in Welsh because David and April are learning Welsh. And the whole purpose of these podcasts is to provide a podcast in learner level Welsh for anyone who wants to learn Welsh, is learning Welsh, or of course if you are already a Welsh speaker and you're interested in Disney. Look out for Crocan Disney, Crochan Disney. Well, as this episode draws towards an end, it would be remiss of me not to mention the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. It is the largest arts festival in the world. A large part of its offerings are made up of musical theatre, which is obviously a delight to us here at Musical Talk, and it opens at the end of the week, running for 3 weeks leading up to the bank holiday at the end of August. You know the drill, I hope. It's been running for over 75 years, so there's really no excuse not to know what's going on. But this year, I thought I might just mention, and these are a random selection, some of the musicals that I've seen advertised, which to me look rather interesting, and that might also be interesting to you if you're going to get a chance to go up to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe this year. So, as I say, these are purely random. There will be some I've missed out, which will be excellent, so this is not pretending to be a list of things you should see. It's merely a list of shows which have sort of leapt off the page at me. There's one called Cafe Latte, described as a brand new immersive musical set in real time in a coffee shop. There's one called Dead Man's Suitcase, which sounds fabulous. That's written by Oxford University students and is a new musical comedy following an obituary writer who seeks refresh by faking his own death. And if you like a bit of death in your musicals, then there's also Death Suits You, which was the Show of the Week winner at the Vault Festival earlier this year. And its blurb says, "We all feel underappreciated at work and death is no exception." There's Four Felons and a Funeral from Goya Theatre, who were responsible for Don't Say Macbeth last year. And they've also got a second show called Actually Love. There's a show called Irrepressible, which is a fresh new musical telling the story of two women 200 years apart on either side of the voracious press machine, which we here in the United Kingdom have seen violently in action in only the last few weeks. So this is quite a prescient musical. There's the wonderfully named Jingle Street, which is about big shot ad writer Colin waking up to discover he can only speak in jingles. A fabulous idea for a musical, in my opinion. There's Kathy and Stella Solve a Murder, which of course was our pick of the Fringe last year. Well, it's back in Edinburgh in an extended version. And that has so many stars from so many reviewers, it's going to be appearing on the Sky at night. There's a show called Mine, a new solo musical, where on a whim a young businessman buys the deeds to a ghost town in the California desert and hopes to turn it into a tourist attraction. And then there's a very welcome return in Vote Macbeth, which was one of our favourite shows from last year, another 5-star show. And they've got a second show up this year, which is an established piece called No Way to Treat a Lady, which is set in 1970s New York and features a failed actor, Kit, who is haunted by his deceased theatre star mother. There's a comedy called On Your Bike, which is about Gemma and Aidan delivering food they can't afford for mega corporation Eatsaroo. This may be fairly zeitgeisty in its parody, I think you'll find. But things get messy when it cuts their pay and starts muscling in on their budding romance. A highlight for me is going to be Sue Casson's Two Tigers. Now, Sue Casson, I think, is one of the great British writers of the last 30 years. And this is one of her original musicals, reworked slightly, and I'm very interested to see it. Two Tigers is a kaleidoscopic musical drama about New Zealand-born modernist writer Catherine Mansfield and her turbulent love affair with John Middleton Murray, who ensured her legacy. And I, for one, am very interested to see it. As I say, anything by Sue is always fabulous. Another British icon here, Gertrude Lawrence. There's a show called Gertrude Lawrence, A Lovely Way to Spend an Evening. The 1930s star of musical comedy tells her story. In this case, of course, being performed by someone else, given that Gertrude Lawrence died many years ago. And that performer is Lucy Stevens, along with pianist Elizabeth Marcus. And it was directed by award-winning cabaret artist and friend of Musical Talk, Sarah Louise Young. I was drawn to a show called Bojangles, with a W. Dracula in Space is its subtitle. And their blurb says, forget everything you think you know about string quartets. Bojangles are an irreverent, anarchic group of genre spanners bringing music, theatre and comedy together in a way you've never seen before. On this occasion, they're blasting into outer space to meet a mysterious benefactor whose proposition seems a little too good to be true. I think any show called Dracula in Space is probably worth a look. And then my eye was also drawn, and anyone who knows me will know why, to a show called Gilbert and Sullivan's Nightmare. Meet old Adam. He's been in every Gilbert and Sullivan show, but he's never quite made it to a lead role. It is now awards night and he is to receive his long service award. Adam has been in the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company for longer than anyone can remember and is hoping he might just get the recognition he deserves. But will his hope be in vain? This is Gilbert and Sullivan as you've never seen them before, viewed through the eyes of their worst nightmare. And just as a little coda, there's also Three Men in a Boat, a fabulous reimagining of the Jerome K. Jerome novel, which is actually a fabulous book. And this is by Not Cricket Productions. Now, it's not actually a musical, but it is a play with music. And the company, which has been around since 2010, has been responsible for a number of shows which have absolutely been fabulous at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, including A Gallant Life, which Mike Shapiro, our old friend, very much raved about a few years ago at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And it's been subtitled Three Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. And even their press release says, Edinburgh Company returns to 2023 Fringe with real dog, full stop. Chaos may ensue, full stop. That sounds a lot of fun. And certainly Not Cricket Productions have quite the reputation already, so that's probably a show well worth seeing, even though it's on the fringes of musical theatre. And that's just a very small selection of the huge number of musicals that you can see at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Do have a look at the website, edfringe.com, and see if there's anything that tickles your fancy. Don't forget there's plenty of shows I've not mentioned. Those were just the ones I've randomly seen and thought, oh, I think I'm quite keen on that. And that, of course, brings this episode to an end. Ulla. As someone in a not dissimilarly named musical to the one we've been talking about today, arranged to be sung quite a lot. Do join us again for another episode of Musical Talk next week, or if not then, whenever. And we'll be talking, of course, about musical theatre, musical film, cabaret or pantomime, but you simply won't know which until you listen to the episode. So join us for that. Until then, it's just time for me to say goodbye. And as that takes about 1 second, that means there's about 1 second left. Let's find out. Goodbye? Yes, that was about a second, wasn't it? This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos.
What I'd also ask you to do, if that's okay, is to, in whichever order you think best, say who you are, your involvement with the show, and one of you should mention the show. It's a surprising number of people forget to mention that tiny fact. And then we'll sort of take it from there, if that's okay. I appreciate you've got so little time, so we'll work it through so that it should finish. Hopefully we'll try and get it to finish at about 1:45. Is that
What
right?
time do you need to be at Pleasance?
12:40.
Right.
You
that's
can run and I can finish, maybe.
Yeah, you sure? Yeah.
well, that's what I like if you're happy. And so, what time would you need to get away? So, Pleasance Dome or Pleasance?
About 1:30. Yeah,
Right.
Pleasance Courtyard.
Well, that's not far.
It's not too bad.
Yeah, we've got half an hour.
It's fine.
Yeah. Sorry,
I'm used to
really
doing these things fairly quickly, so I'm sure we'll be fine.
Fine. In which case, shall we? Start.
Yeah.
Who's first?
I'll go first.